Hello and welcome to Winded on the Move. My Instagram handle is Watches in Singapore, and I'm here to talk about the holy trinity of Swiss sports watches. The point of this video is not to go in depth into any of the three watches. Instead, my goal is to share my thoughts and experiences after living with all of them. For reference, I've spent roughly 6 years with both the Nautilus and Royal Oak. The Overseas, on the other hand, was only purchased half a year ago. To compare the watches, we'll run through a few key categories: the dial, the case and bezel, bracelet, movement, comfort, and my overall preference out of the three. Let's start off with the dial. To begin with the Nautilus, I'd say that the main appeal of the 5711 dial is the range of colors that the curtain dial can showcase. Depending on lighting conditions, this can range from a light gray to shades of blue. The sunburst effect is also smooth and enjoyable, although it becomes slightly less so under bright light when all the sunburst texture pops out. Moving on to the hands, hour markers, and minute track, I have to say that the Nautilus is unremarkable, as there isn't much that jumps out in terms of design or finishing. Perhaps the simplicity is for the better, keeping the watch subtle and allowing our eyes to focus on the curtain dial. But as we'll see from the Royal Oak and Overseas later on, I think it's a missed opportunity. Talking about missed opportunities, I want to highlight the main weakness of the 5711 dial, which is the date window. It looks like someone cut a hole in the dial and filled it with the wrong Microsoft Office font. Where one falters, another one excels. In my opinion, the best part of the Royal Oak dial is unironically the date window. The font looks fitting, and the background color allows the window to blend into the rest of the dial. Other small details I enjoy include the angled hour markers, which are well polished, as well as the mirror chapter ring. Then there's AP's tapestry dial. I find the tapestry dial most enjoyable under lower lighting, as the texture of the dial can pop out under brighter conditions, making it look like a mess. On a side note, I think that the dial of the 15500 is slightly imbalanced, given the large amount of empty space at the bottom of the dial. Finally, let's discuss the Overseas. Of course, we need to start off with the blue lacquered dial. The dial is nice under lower lighting, where it can come across as either black or a beautiful deep blue. But it's under bright light where this blue dial is unparalleled. While it has a sunburst effect like its rivals, the Overseas dial does not reveal any sunburst texture to the naked eye. This results in an elegant and smooth sunburst effect that transitions from a dark blue to a vibrant electric shade. As I've alluded to earlier, the second key strength of the Overseas are the hands, hour markers, and minute tracks. The hands and hour markers are beautifully finished with facets that let them play with light more dynamically. This is most evident with the hour and minute hand, where one facet will often be dark and the other bright. Moving on, the Overseas dial has 2 minute tracks. The inner one is radially brushed and highly reflective, while the outer one is banked and finished in a different velvety blue. Altogether, these details add complexity to the flat dial of the watch. Yet, I don't think that the Overseas dial is perfect. Like with the Nautilus, the date window isn't great, featuring what looks like another Microsoft Office font. But at the very least, the border of the date window suggests that more effort was involved here. To conclude, my favorite dial of the three belongs to the Overseas. It's in a league of its own under bright light, and the attention to those small details is just the icing on the cake. Given that most posts on Instagram are photos rather than videos, these tiny details often go unappreciated. Moving on to the second section, let's talk about the case and bezel. To start things off, I'll just say that all three watches have cases and bezels that are finished well. All also incorporate an interesting mix of brushed and polished surfaces. Now that's out of the way, let's focus on the Genta watches, which both have amazing and iconic designs. Given the wealth of videos out there, I'll give you my simplified take. The octagonal bezel paired with the hexagonal screws of the Royal Oak are iconic and have immense presence, sort of like a Lamborghini Aventador. Meanwhile, the case of the Nautilus is the most interesting to me. When viewed from the side, it resembles a porthole that can be opened. As for the Overseas, I find the case and bezel to be subtle in design. The incorporation of the Maltese cross into the mirror-polished bezel is unintrusive in person and makes a watch a lot more dynamic to look at. If I had to choose, the Nautilus has my favorite case and bezel. Aside from the classy, subtle, and timeless look, I adore how the case appears like it can be unscrewed and flipped open. While I do enjoy the iconic look of the Royal Oak, its sharpness and industrial aesthetic make it a watch I would rather enjoy occasionally rather than constantly. As a quick aside, it's worth mentioning that the overseas case is anti-magnetic and has a water resistance of 150 meters. The Nautilus case has a lower water resistance of 120 meters, and the 15500 comes in with 50 meters. I don't think these technical figures are very important, so all I'll say is that the overseas case is the one that feels most robust. It's the only watch out of the three that I frequently bring swimming. Let's move on to the third section, which is the bracelet. If we're talking purely about the metal bracelets, then I think the Royal Oak is the undisputed king. It is so good that one wonders why AP doesn't just forget about the watches and become a bracelet company instead. Both the design and finishing of the bracelet are awesome. The flat nature of the various links also makes it very reflective, which is an event in itself. Add to all this a solid deployant clasp, and you get a bracelet that is great in looks and functionality. I'd say that the overseas bracelet is similar to the AP bracelet in that both have vertically brushed sections coupled with polished bevels and areas between the links. While I didn't initially appreciate the design of the overseas bracelet, it has grown on me over time as it gives the watch a very complete look. This bracelet also features a great deployant clasp and fantastic micro adjustment capabilities. The Nautilus bracelet is handsome and classy. However, it's relatively plain compared to the other two. On top of that, the clasp is outdated and not befitting of a watch at this level. So far, I've only discussed metal bracelets, but thankfully, the overseas features an interchangeable strap system that's easy to use. The rubber strap is superb as it looks good with the texture and is very comfortable. In contrast, I find the leather strap just okay, although it can be great for those who lack a dress watch or want the added versatility. Finally, the deployant clasp with the straps looks beautiful, but is a bit flimsy on the interchangeable side. Overall, the Royal Oak has my pick for the best metal bracelet, but if we consider the overseas strap system, then it gets my pick. The bracelet is already great, and the two straps add bundles of versatility. Let's move on to the next section, which is the movement. For this part, I'll mainly discuss the looks of the three case backs. I won't touch on reliability as I think it differs on a case-by-case basis. I also won't dive into functions like hacking seconds and date changes, as I don't use these watches to tell the precise time. As for power reserve, the 15500's caliber 4302 has the best power reserve at 70 hours. The overseas is second with 60 hours of power reserve, and the Nautilus's updated caliber 330SC lasts at a maximum of 45 hours. With that out of the way, let's get started on the looks of each exhibition caseback. I feel that the overseas has the most beautiful caseback. It has the best finishing to my eyes and features a gorgeous rotor that resembles a compass. While the architecture of the movement looks tidy, there is complexity as the sections in between the plates provide a glimpse into the inner workings. My second pick would be the Royal Oak movement, specifically that of the 15500. Although the 15202's JLC design caliber 2121 features hand finishing, the numerous gears make the caseback look messy. As for my 15400, it takes a smaller caliber 2120 and dumps it into a larger case. Is it lazy? Perhaps, but it still looks pretty good. In comparison to the other two, I don't feel that the Nautilus has a particularly special caseback. It's nice, but doesn't really stand out to my eyes. I will caveat this by saying that I haven't spent much time looking at the updated caliber 330SC in person. So the final section is on comfort. I'll quickly discuss this by saying that all three watches sit well on my large wrist. However, to many people, wearing the overseas would be a challenge. Not only is the 41mm already quite big, but the way the lugs flare out means that you also need a somewhat flat wrist to pull the watch off. In my view, this is the main obstacle preventing the overseas from attaining greater popularity. As a result, I think that the Nautilus and Royal Oak are best in terms of comfort. Both the 5711 and 15202 are great on the wrist due to their size and thinness. So with everything in mind, what is my overall preference? Ultimately, my favorite piece of the three is the Nautilus. It's not particularly special when you break it down into categories and analyze it, but as a package, I think it's the best sports watch out there. The design is beautiful and timeless, yet subtle at the same time. It feels amazing on the wrist too, due to its thin and light nature. But while the 5711 is my favorite, it doesn't get the most wrist time. My Overseas is by far the watch that gets the most wrist time nowadays. Aside from it being a gorgeous and versatile watch that's filled with small details, there are two key reasons why I wear it the most. The first is that it flies under the radar. Although I like wearing nice watches, I don't appreciate them being recognized, especially not in a work environment. While I've had many people comment about my watches to my face and behind my back, the Overseas is one that almost never attracts attention. The second reason is the exclusivity of the piece. Due to Singapore being a small city-state with a lot of wealthy residents, you often see the Nautilus and Royal Oak out and about. There's just something nice about wearing a watch that you almost never see on someone else's wrist. The Royal Oak gets the least wrist time, as it doesn't fit my character or my taste very well anymore. I get tired easily of the sharp and industrial look, as well as the highly reflective bracelet. But despite all that, I still think it's a great watch.